I've seen it happen in my prison programs where we'll have a gang leader decide that he wants to talk about the fact that he was sexually abused as a child. Not a safe topic in prison, especially for somebody who's highly respected on the rank. And even if it doesn't open up guys in the circle, I'll see guys kind of crowding around him afterwards, talking to them. And it gives them another chance. And it's funny because the men in the prison will say, we sat in this room for 3 days. We do not want it to end. It was like we were free for 3 days. And it's that sense of freedom and sense of that community that's so powerful for everybody that participates in it. So I try to build that. So I'm always thinking, what is the purpose of the circle? And not that I'm trying to figure out the ending, because the circle should figure out the ending. But I don't want to just have a circle and then say, everybody go home, this was a great experience. But to say, okay, what happens next? And we've got some relationships going on. Is there some way to build them? Is there some way to do things? And depending on the objective. There's people that can lead circles, there are people that can't. And, there's some training and technique things, but, for some people, they need to direct and be controlled too much. And whether it's interrupting people or whether it's kind of obviously controlling where you want to go by the question. And, as much as I've worked with some people, I in my head come to the conclusion, they really shouldn't be the one doing it. And whether I tell them or not depends on the circumstances. But, and I think that for me, it's, all the different, being a judge and being a lawyer, and I think always being a pretty good listener, and I always have seen the grays, as I said. I often sort of envy people that it's black and white, the world, and every answer you can decide by looking at the chart. And for me, I always saw different perspectives. And so I think for me, it's been sort of a natural to get into this kind of work where, you just kind of say, everybody's got a perspective and a way of looking at this, and if we share it all, we're all that much stronger for it. As I've become older, I really, I understand task force and commissions and all these things. I won't do those things anymore because there are too many reports sitting on shelves of people that had these grand schemes. And I've really gotten to a place in my life saying, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and deal with a small group and see if we can figure out how to do it. And then we try to replicate and go from the bottom up, because going from the top down almost never works. A changing a law at the Supreme Court can do a lot of change. But frankly, community groups studying things and coming up with suggestions, or there's funding for a little while and it's gone. And so to try to build things that are become part of the fabric of the community and the way we do business, I think, at least my perspective, is you start from the bottom up, and it's a lot more gratifying, and I'm a storyteller, so I probably average 4 to 6 speeches a month, and I go out and tell the stories. And that's how I get people to come to the circles or come to the prison, because they hear my stories and they then want to come. And to me, that's sort of my role in life right now, is to try to do the process. I get a lot out of it, but then to use those experiences to do the storytelling, to engage people and have people look at restorative justice in a new and different way. And I got CEOs of companies that now are great fans of restorative justice, that just because they heard me speak, they decided to come with me to the prison, and now they go out and talk to everybody else about it. We were in a circle, it's not one of our community circles, we were in a circle, and there was a long-term gang member. His father had been a gang member, his brothers were gang members. He'd been in and out of prison 3 times. And we had police officers and others in the circle, and he talked about his life and talked about, that he's been out of prison before, been promised jobs, there were no jobs. He goes back to what he knows. It's just this honesty. I know that's what I do, and there's nothing else out here, so that's probably what I'm going to wind up doing again. He was pretty honest, as they are. And he described his history, and so there was an older police officer, Polish police officer, who does some community work. He was in the circle, and afterwards, he went up to this guy and said, I don't give you a pass, but I understand now how you got where you got. He said, here's my card. If you ever need help, contact me. And he shook his hand and he walked away. And this gang member said to his parole agent, who was in the circle, I've never had a cop talk to me like that before. And so anyway, 3 weeks go by, and the gang member guy shows up at the police station asking for the cop. And so they find the cop and they bring him in. The cop barely remembers this whole incident, and the guy said, "You gave me your card and said you'd help me. I need help. I can't get a job. And I really would like to get a full-time job with health and benefits because I want my son back and I need insurance for him." And the cop and the community prosecutor started calling all over for employers, and they found him a part-time job. But they kept on calling, and they found a warehouse that was actually was hiring people, and they got an interview for him. And the cop and the prosecutor went with the gang member to the interview. And the two professionals pulled the employer aside and said, "You know, we really think you ought to give this guy a chance. We've been testing him. We've been making him come in at 8 o'clock in the morning to the police station for a week. You know, we're monitoring with his agent. He's not using drugs. We think he's sincere." And the employer said, "I don't know. I hired somebody else from prison, and they were good for a little while, and they ripped me off. Took me a year to recover from it." And so he actually didn't hire him on the spot, but the police officer called him again and said, "Really, look, I'll give you my card. You call me if there's any problem. I will personally come the minute there's a problem, if there's a problem. But I think you ought to take a chance on this guy." And so he hired him, and he's been Employee of the Month 3 times. And he's getting a paycheck, and he comes to the circles for the reentry guys to tell him his experience. And it's not, they're risk. At one point, he tested dirty on his urine drop. And the agent called the cop, and the cop called him in and said, "Look, I stood up for you. You need to keep clean, or this isn't going to work." And that's the only violation there's been. He's doing well. And we've had him speak at some of the big community events and things. It's community, it's police, it's all of us coming together and giving the support that needs to be there, because my belief, particularly on reentry offenders, is the majority of them really would rather not return to crime. They really rather find a job that somehow supports them. But the problem is to put the support systems in place to do that, and that's what we need to do.